So as I said today, I wanted to talk about imperatives, that is commands, in the writings of Swedenborg. It's based on the understanding that if we have a religion, a religious conviction, it makes certain demands upon every one of us. And we can't really say that we adhere to a religion without adhering to those commands. As you know, we've spent the last several months considering the commands of Jesus, and in considering that and bringing it to a close, it seemed only natural then to go on to look at Swedenborg's work and consider what commands and imperatives there might be in that. As I said before, I want to make it wider than that though. That really is only my starting point. And really just consider what is it that religion demands of us in general. The first thing I have to say, I think, is that, of course, it's almost doesn't need to be said, that whatever commands we find, whatever imperatives we find within the writings, they ought to coincide and they ought to be consistent with the commands of Jesus. Earlier in the year, I posed this question on the National New Church Google group. And I posed it to ministers as well, my colleagues here in Australia and also colleagues in the US. And I got a wide variety of answers, and I'm going to share some of those with you shortly. But I do just want to point out the great variety that there is in those responses I received earlier in the year. So here are some of them. This is one that we used, I think, in the last service we had, and it so happened to be one of the responses that I received during the year. Let him who wishes to be eternally happy know and believe that he will live after death. Let him think of this and keep it in mind, for it is the truth. Let him also know and believe that the Word is the only doctrine which teaches how a man must live in the world in order to be happy to eternity. Here's another. Since the Lord's life on earth, people have been required to lead an inward life, which is a life of faith and charity, as well as an outward life shaped by inner realities. The essentials of the Church, which unite themselves with a faith in one God, are charity, good works, repentance, and a life according to divine laws. It is not necessary for the person to know anything more than to refrain from evils as sins and look to the Lord. Only thus can a person's life's love, which from birth is hellish, be put away by the Lord, and a heavenly life's love be implanted in its stead. So as I said, those are some of the responses I received from colleagues and friends in the New Church across the country and across the world. But I also wondered, what are the things that we learn from near-death experience? I'm sure many of you have heard of near-death experiences and the great change that they bring about in people's lives. I just want to mention a few. This chap, Scott Drummond, is one you can find on YouTube. And one of the things he says is, everything I was doing prior to his near-death experience, everything I was doing was for myself, and none of it was for my family. Richard says this, it's all about love. All my problems, the things I thought were problems, just melted away. And this is Peter Fenwick. Now, Peter Fenwick is a doctor in England. He is a neuropsychiatrist. He studies both the brain and the mind. And whilst he hasn't had a near-death experience himself, he's studied them at some length. And the lesson that he derives from all of these is the importance to give up attachment to worldly things. So you can see that these all hold principles within them that we can find some benefit in paying attention to. Now, in a sense, the question of what religion demands from us is quite an easy one to answer. Many of us will come up with some answer like to love the Lord and charity towards the neighbour. It's almost too obvious, isn't it? But what's not so easy is the application of religious principles. And often our faith is tested and our principles are tested when we're put in trying and difficult situations and circumstances. When we meet a difficult person, when we're under stress, these are when it becomes much, much harder to live by the religion that we subscribe to. We so easily retreat into gut reactions and instincts instead of stopping and holding ourselves accountable to those principles. I want to share with you these words by Peter, where he says, "I say then, walk in the Spirit, and you shall not fulfill the lusts of the flesh. For the flesh lusts against the Spirit, and the Spirit against the flesh. And these are contrary to one another, so that you do not do the things that you wish." Now, what's interesting about that is that Paul is writing to Christians. He's writing to people who have accepted Jesus, they accept everything that Jesus teaches, and they strive to follow his command. And yet Peter felt it necessary to write to them and tell them that they must walk in the Spirit, that what their spirit and their flesh asks them to do are different things. So you can see this is something that no one is exempt from. We all come into this testing when life gets hard. So I wonder, what are your principles? What are the things that you consider important to do as a result of the religious faith that you have? I sat down and I made a list, and it's quite a long list, but I'll share some of it with you. Top of my list was honesty and integrity, kindness, making the effort to see the good in others and placing a good interpretation on the bad that I see. To pay my way, not to expect anybody else to pay for me. To pay my taxes cheerfully and to be generous. To love as unconditionally as I am able to do. To be content and thankful. To do things that other people enjoy just because they enjoy them, not necessarily because of any joy I myself might derive from them, but because of the joy it brings to them. To be the shoulders that someone else stands on to achieve their successes. To forgive. Never to forget that we're all learning. and that includes me. As I say, that's some of my list. And I suppose as we go into the week ahead, I would ask you to consider, what is your list? What are the principles that you hold yourself accountable to as a result of the religion that you subscribe to?